Okay, we'll start with this. Well, the news broke yesterday that WBC lightweight champion Deline Puron is going to be defending her title against the tenacious Melissa St Ville on March 9th. And this is just my reaction to the news. You know, one, this is a step up in competition from the girls that Deline Puron has been fighting. Understand that Deline Puron has squared off with some real good fighters, real good killers. But as of late, the kind of girls she's been fighting are lackluster competition. You know, a lot of those fights, they look like keep busy fights, showcase fights, not something you would expect from someone as accomplished as Deline Puron. And the reason I think Deline Puron is taking it up a notch and taking on a more interesting opponent than her last two or whatever, I think the reason she's taking on a more interesting opponent is because she sees what else is going on in the weight class. She sees what else is happening in other areas of the division involving world champions. That IBF and WBA champion Katie Taylor is going to be squaring off against Rose Volante, WBO champion, very soon. And a fight like that, I mean, not only does it draw attention to the weight class, but it's also heralding a signal for Deline Puron to prepare herself, because she may find herself with just such a challenge in the near future. And those showcase fights, those kinds of opponents, the kind of girls that she's fought in her last two fights or whatever, they're not going to get you ready for the winner of that Taylor versus Volante fight. So you need to face some stiff competition to get you ready. And Melissa St Ville just so happens to be that stiff competition. I think the reason that Deline Puron is fighting Melissa St Ville, I mean, yeah, she's an opponent with more of a profile than some of these other girls that have been out there, but also Melissa St Ville is a better fighter than those girls. She really gave Eva Wallstrom, WBC super featherweight champion Eva Wallstrom, she really gave her a run for her money in her own backyard. So for Deline Puron, this represents an opportunity to sharpen your skills, sharpen your tools. That, you know, you can't fight no-hopers and then walk into a Katie Taylor or a Rose Volante situation. You can't fight no-hopers, because those no-hopers, they're not going to get you ready.
Not for them.
At minimum, what those no-hopers are good for are shaking off the cobwebs, getting back into the swing of things. But ahead of what could be a very dangerous fight, those no-hopers, they're not doing you any favors. So you got to sharpen your skills against someone that can pose some resistance. And that someone is Melissa St Ville. Now, for Melissa St Ville, this is the opportunity of a lifetime for more reasons than one. You know, the fight is taking place in Belgium. That is Deline Puron's backyard. So there's that to deal with. You understand? That if you were to fight her and beat her decisively, it'd really be saying something, because you will have done so in her backyard. And in doing so, you would become the WBC lightweight champion. Many people out there, myself, I'm ambivalent, but many people out there will tell you that that is the most prestigious of the belts that are available. You know, of all the alphabet titles, people will tell you that that's the most prestigious one to hold.
Depends on who you ask.
But winning the fight isn't the only reward associated with the fight, because we know that Katie Taylor has her heart set on unifications. That's why she's fighting Rose Volante. So assume that Katie Taylor were to win her fight with Rose, and Melissa were to unseat Deline Puron, she would become a world champion, and that would guarantee her a fight, or at minimum bring her that much more close to it. But that would get her a fight with the winner of Taylor versus Volante. So there's more opportunities than one here. I think Melissa knows this. I think she knows this. And that's why she's willing to travel to Belgium to have that fight. I'll tell you that I don't think it's going to be easy. And I'll tell you that it being that the contest is taking place in Belgium, it behooves Melissa St Ville to go for the knockout. You know, that's the only bit of advice that I can really offer from where I'm sitting, because, you know, it's her backyard. And at the end of the day, we know what perils are associated with that. When you're traveling to hostile territory and you may end up relying on the judges to tell you who won the fight. Well, you know what? In that situation, you got to try to take it out of their hands. You don't let them tell you who won the fight. You tell them who won the fight. You go for the knockout. Now, that's not a prediction. That's just a bit of advice. Like I said, ahead of this news, it's very momentous news, because the lightweight division has no shortage of talent. There's lots of good fighters in that weight class, and Melissa St Ville could become a champion in that weight class. That's the opportunity that lies before her. So I will say that this is a very, or it could be a very important fight in the lightweight division. I'm not going to get into a breakdown just yet. We'll do a breakdown as the fight date approaches. That's on March 9th. But at minimum, what I will say is you need to keep your eyes on this fight, because the winner of this fight is likely going to be in the crosshairs for the winner of Taylor versus Volante. And in other news, to my surprise, get this, Oscar De La Hoya is eyeing a potential Munguia versus Jermell Charlo showdown in Houston. And De La Coca was basically saying that before Munguia moves up to middleweight, because, in case you're not aware, Jaime Munguia is actually very big for junior middleweight. But De La Coca was saying that he would like for Jaime Munguia to unify the world titles before he moves up to middleweight, because one, it would definitely raise his profile, it would raise his stock, and two, in doing so, it would make him a force to reckon with before he actually moves up to middleweight and challenges bigger names, etc., etc. And, Jaime Munguia is going to be fighting later on tonight. He's going to be fighting Takeshi Inoue. That fight is taking place in Houston, but coincidentally, a part of Oscar De La Hoya's plan for Munguia to face Jermell Charlo is for the fight to take place in Houston, it being that he feels that the fight crowd there is very supportive, very proactive, and they could easily fill an arena, with that fight between Jaime Munguia and Jermell Charlo. And I quote, "That fight would fill the Toyota Center without a problem." But don't go getting too excited just yet, because there is a potential hindrance. There is a potential catch-22. You see, Jaime Munguia is saying that, yeah, I might get an opportunity to fight one of those other champions, but I might be moving up before that happens. He's saying he might move up before 2019 is over. So let me preface everything I'm about to say with this. I'm not naive, you understand.
Do you understand?
I think that the reason that Oscar De La Hoya may have become receptive to the idea of a Munguia versus Charlo fight, for example, is because Charlo just took his first professional loss. You understand? If Jaime Munguia were to be facing Jermell Charlo now, that wouldn't be a unification fight, because Charlo just lost his title to Tony Harrison. So let's not be coy, let's not be naive. That perhaps the reason Oscar De La Hoya has become more receptive to that fight with that particular fighter, staging it in Houston where he knows that Jermell has fans, him and his brother, maybe the reason that he became receptive to that idea is because Jermell was just derailed. His momentum, he's still got to bounce back. In other words, Jermell looks more beatable now than he used to. Maybe that looks like a more winnable fight for Jaime to Oscar De La Hoya, because Jermell just lost his first fight. Thus, Oscar is more willing to make a fight like that. Let me tell you something. When these kinds of talks were first floating around a couple of months ago, I made a video, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. I made a video detailing how I myself didn't feel that the people over there at Golden Boy and the people over there at Zanford Promotions were likely to allow Jaime Munguia to have that fight with those guys, because at that point, it might have been too soon, might be too dangerous. He's a young guy, there's plenty of room for growth, plenty of room for improvement, and he just became a world champion. So I figured that if anything, they were going to keep him away from those kinds of fights. Yet here we have Oscar saying he's receptive to a fight like that in Houston at a particular venue, and we're tasked with trying to understand why. And I reiterate, the reason I think that he might be receptive to that is because Jermell just lost his last fight. He's still got to bounce back. He's still got to get that world title back from Tony Harrison. So when a guy looks a little bit more human, of course you're going to be more receptive to making a fight with him. So I think that's why Oscar's all ears all of a sudden. But the other stuff, that bit of it is true. Jermell Charlo, the Charlo brothers, they got fans down there. They got a following down there. And Jaime Munguia, tonight, he's being introduced to that audience that is also down there. He is also being introduced to that audience so that he can gain fans down there. So in terms of Oscar saying that they could potentially sell out the Toyota Center down there with a fight like that, yeah, I agree. I believe that. I think they could too. Charlo's got a following down there, and if Jaime Munguia develops a following of his own down there, that could definitely happen. And I guess at minimum, what we can say, given recent events, not just involving Jaime Munguia, but another Golden Boy fighter who's far more well-known, Canelo Alvarez. Considering the recent news involving him and his upcoming fight with Daniel Jacobs. Now that was a fight that a lot of people weren't sure would come off. That a lot of people felt, I don't know if they're going to stage that fight. That's kind of a risky fight for Canelo. And yet, the fight has been made. We are going to get that fight. Where people thought that Canelo Alvarez was probably going to navigate up there somewhere at 168 pounds, fighting no hopers and lighter touches. He's fighting in a unification fight. They let the fight go through. They let that happen. And what did Oscar say before the news broke? That he likes Daniel Jacobs, and he is receptive to that fight. He is willing to make that fight. And here we are. The fight is made. So when he's sitting here saying that he's receptive to a Charlo fight, I have inclination to believe him. But, you know, this potential fight is riddled with problems. You know, for starters, Jermell Charlo's about to engage in a rematch with Tony Harrison to see if he can reclaim that world title. And that would undoubtedly come first before a Jaime Munguia fight. Before it even becomes about Munguia and his belt and unifying anything with him, you've got to get back your title so that you could unify it with Munguia's. Then there's the second problem, which really isn't a problem so much as a scenario, that if Jermell Charlo beats Tony Harrison and gets his world title back, who's to say that he even looks in Munguia's direction? Who's to say, and what's to say, that he doesn't decide to fight Jarrett Hurd next? People have been waiting for that fight. I think that's a good fight, and more importantly, regardless of which fight you rather see, the reality of it all is that a Charlo fight and a Jarrett Hurd fight is likelier to come off because both of those guys are under the same umbrella. They're both PBC fighters. I don't think the people at the PBC, I don't think those people over there want to see Jermell Charlo end up on DAZN fighting for Munguia's title. I think the fight that they would make before that would be the Jarrett Hurd fight. And presumably, while these different things are going on, the hope would have to be that Munguia is still in the weight class once the smoke settles from those two fights. From a fight with Tony Harrison, assuming Charlo wins, then walks into a Jarrett Hurd fight, assuming Charlo wins, then presumably the hope would have to be that Munguia's still there for him to fight. And Munguia's saying that he might end up moving up before 2019 is over. So I'll say this much. I like the fight. I like all of those fights. I wish Jaime Munguia would stay at junior middleweight to further build his brand before he decides to go to 160. As a matter of fact, I think he really should stay at junior middleweight for as long as he can, for as long as he can make the weight, so that he can see those things come into fruition. That way, when he goes to 160, he'll have a very big name. The potential window of opportunity is there. But like I said, there are realities involved in this thing. You know, that while all these other things may come first, Jaime Munguia might move up. I don't really feel like he should. I think it benefits him to stay there for as long as he can. But those are the realities of it. So until more develops, until we see more things at junior middleweight unfold, we really ain't gonna know how close we are or aren't to these fights. And finally, some insights into pound-for-pound fighter and undisputed cruiserweight champion Alexander Usyk's 12-month game plan to take over the heavyweight division. It appears that the next step, the next phase in Alexander's career is the complete abandonment of the cruiserweight division. Thus, we can expect him to relinquish all of those world titles that he procured, in a very short time, mind you, all of those world titles, and his next fight will likely be a fight in the heavyweight division. Now, names that you can rule out are Anthony Joshua's name, Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder's name. Those guys are rumored to be in deep negotiations with each other. So we shouldn't expect that Usyk should fight any of those three guys anytime in the near future, but he will commence his heavyweight campaign, and it should be going down mid-May in the United States. Now, an opponent has yet to be determined, so the pool of options is almost infinite. Who knows who he will decide to fight in what will be his heavyweight debut? Now, for those of you that keep up with the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, those of you particular to that list who follow it, know how it works, you know what it means if a guy moves up in weight, relinquishes his world titles, and isn't immediately walking into a world title situation. In other words, Usyk might lose his spot on the pound-for-pound list, the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, up until the point he procures a world title in his new weight class, the heavyweight division. For those of you who might not, you know, I understand if that doesn't sit well with some people out there. I understand that there might be some resistance to that idea. For those people, I'll leave the link in the description box of a video I made detailing the reasons why the list works the way that it works and what the rhyme and the reason for that would be. That why should Usyk lose a spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list after everything he's accomplished? Why should him moving up to heavyweight affect that? I'll leave the link in the description box that explains the rhyme and the reason for that. I will say, however, that for those people out there who keep their own pound-for-pound lists and they have their own criteria that governs and structures how their lists are are and who is in those lists for what reasons. For those people out there who might decide to keep Usyk on their list, I understand. I'm not telling you this guy's not a pound-for-pound fighter. At the end of the day, my list works a certain way, and it can't contradict itself. The logic has to stick, and those rules, they're not going to change for anybody, including Usyk. Until he procures a world title at heavyweight, he's going to lose a spot, because in order to maintain a spot on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, you have to hold at least a minimum of one world title. And if Usyk's not walking into a world title fight, not that I think he should have to, but if his next fight isn't a world title fight, then he's going to lose a spot. Now, I'll say this much, because I discussed this in a previous video. A lot of people are looking at Usyk's physical dimensions and thinking to themselves that this man does not have the physical dimensions to compete with today's lumbering lummoxes. But I'm of the opinion that that's simply not true. That while he may not be as big as some of these guys, he may not have the same physical dimensions as some of these guys, and he may not even pack the same kind of punch that a lot of these guys pack. He has the agility, the speed, the quickness, the ring IQ and reflexes to be a force to be reckoned with in the heavyweight division. That where a lot of these guys are going to be a lot slower, they don't have a gas tank like he does, they don't have a work rate like he does. These kinds of things could actually lend themselves, along with his smaller stature compared to them, these kinds of things could actually lend themselves to his success. Now, some potential opponent options immediately came to mind when I read this article. I'm of the opinion that Usyk versus Emmanuel Char, for example, is a fight that makes sense. Usyk versus Pulev is also another fight that makes sense. Those are fights against seasoned heavyweights
that are legitimate contenders
that would effectively allow Usyk to dip his toe in the pool of the weight class while not taking the plunge all at once. Because those guys are heavyweights. They've been around the block. They know what they're doing. That is proven. But at the same time, it's not as big a plunge as taking on a Wilder, a Joshua, a Fury, your first fight at the weight. You know, it's not as it's a way for you to warm up to just what kind of shit is out there. A fight with Emmanuel Char, a fight with a Pulev. Shit, a fucking fight with a Povetkin. I think that'd be a great goddamn fight. And Russia and the Ukraine have the same kind of rivalry that Mexico and Puerto Rico got. So you get a guy like Povetkin and a guy like Usyk in the ring, oh yeah, sparks are gonna fly, because it's that kind of a rivalry between them. The potential opponent options for Usyk are endless, but this is a very ambitious fighter that is proven. He's proven as an amateur, he is proven now as a professional, and if the trend continues, if the trend sticks, then this guy might just be proven as a fucking heavyweight. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare yourselves, because in May, in the United States of America, Usyk intends to make his heavyweight debut.